Documentaries, movies, and books have been produced and written about the challenges the Lost Boys endured as they fled the conflict in South Sudan. However, little is known about the plight of the lost girls who also faced similar circumstances. We're joined on the program by Rebecca Deng, author of the new book, What They Meant for Evil. Join us as we discuss her new book and more, only here on Beyond the Headlines. Rebecca Deng is one of 89 lost girls who came to the United States as a refugee after living for 8 years in Kakuma refugee camp in northern Kenya. Today, Rebecca Deng is an international speaker and advocate for women and children who have been traumatized and victimized by war. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us here on Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you so much, sister, for welcoming me to your lovely studio. And it's just cool to meet another like-minded person. So thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you. In your book, What They Meant for Evil, you start off by describing as a young child the heartbreaking experience of losing your mother and simultaneously escaping conflict in your village, which was attacked by soldiers. Can you briefly talk about the experience?
Yes, thank you. So that was 1991, middle of 91, ending of it there. I can't really remember the month because at that time I was like 6 years old or just turned 6 and didn't really know much. But I just remember growing up in a lovely village. My village is close to the desert, which is the world, I think, largest swampland. It's very diverse. Most people hear about the Amazon, but they start in South Sudan. It's really diverse. They have diverse life and green. It's green all year round. So growing up there, I have never really seen anything that is like desert-like. It was just always green and lush. So that was my village. It was a village. It was a Dinka tribe village at the border. We were at the border, so my tribes are bilingual. They speak both Nuer and Dinka because they are border people. And so we see people coming in and out, going to what they call touch, which is desert, and during dry season and moving back to the areas. And it was just lovely. So growing up, I grew up listening to all kind of different music, different languages, different sound of dancing at night. There was no electricity. It was a simple village. Most people were cattle herders, and people grow corn and sorghum and maize. Which is called maize, and different kind of calabash and squash and okra. So it was just a typical normal village. I have heard of the war that was being fought between the southern part of Sudan and northern part. But that war as a child, because I have never seen it, just seemed like a long away history or like a make up something by older people. Because my village was so peaceful. We never really hear any guns except when the soldiers came in. Every now and then passing by, they will sometimes shoot up in the air like 3 guns to warn the villagers we are coming. And then they peacefully pass through the village. Sometimes the only thing I will see is that they kill a cattle for them to welcome them and eat, because my dad was one of the SPLA, the Sudan Liberation Army commander. So he will come sometime with his bodyguard or soldiers or his troop. So that's the only thing that I knew in my village. And then I have everybody in our village was called aunt, uncle, or cousins. Even if we were not blood related. So that was my village, simple. Then 1991, it was attacked. And when it was attacked, we were sleeping. It was the middle of the night. And I think it was a rainy season because I remember running and then couldn't really run, and my uncle had to carry me. So that was very traumatizing because not only were the guns the bullets were flying everywhere, but at the same time too, there was touching of the buildings. And that was really scary. And that's the first time I understood what war is. Before then, I just heard that people were fighting. And when I asked some of my cousins, they would say, we're fighting with Khartoum government. And I'm saying, where is Khartoum? And they say, it's far away. So it didn't make sense to me. But that night, it made sense to me. So that was the first time I really understood what war was. There were few attacks when I was like maybe 4 or 3.5, 4, 5, but I didn't remember them well. But that attack is what I remember vividly. Mm-hmm. And so we left the village that night, going to the nearby village. And then the rest was just a sequence of different village being attacked, and then us making it to the next one, and then they keep catching up with us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I just, of course, I did read the book. This is a great book indeed. I would encourage our viewers to go ahead and purchase it. Just the detail, the amount of detail and the description of the scenes in the book is amazing, because you feel like you're right there in the midst of either the conflict, the joy, the suffering. I mean, all the experiences that you've gone through, one feels like they're a part of it as well. So this is a great book to read, and really it offers a great perspective on the plight of the lost girls, since you are among the lost girls who were able to come to the US. Talk about, because in the book, one thing that you really emphasize is the close bond you felt with your grandmother, who you refer to as Kokok. And what does the name Kokok mean?
Thank you. So the name of Kokok in Dinka means grandmother. And my mother died when I was 2 at one of the attack, one of them that I remember a little bit, but not much. And so that was like when I was 2.5. And then during that attack, when she died, she went into labor and had a baby and had complication, and there was no nearby hospital. So she did not make it. And the baby passed like a month later. But so Kokok raised me in the village. And she was the most beautiful person that I have ever met. She was so tall. I described her vividly in the book, like she had like a skirt that is made out of skin, and on that is like different kind of coins, like for decoration. And around her ears loop, it was like all piercing. So she had like traditional like handmade jewelry all over her, and just a beautiful woman. So I would say that my grandmother, when I became a refugee and learned about humanitarian work, I would say that my grandmother was the first lens that showed me what humanity. It seemed like my life was kind of pre-shadowed, when I look back, because I remember her, like she will make us dinner. And she was a wealthy woman. She was a widow, but I didn't even know until later on. I didn't process it at that time, but I just remember I never met my grandfather. So later on, I figured out, yeah, she was widow, but she was very wealthy. She had like a lot, like over 500 head of cattle, and she would loan some to the villagers that didn't have cattle to raise the cow because she cannot take care of it, and then benefit from the milk of the cow. So she had that. And then again, in our immediate family, she will make dinner for us. And then when we finish eating, she will always go back to cook again. And then we say, Grandma, who are you cooking? And she will say, oh, they are the travelers of the night. And we're like, who are the travelers of the night? And she said, those are the people passing by through our village, either going for a wedding in a nearby village, or visiting relative, or seeing their sick people, families that got sick. And yeah, it makes sense now, because in the village, there was no hotel or anything like that. So people will always pass through different huts in the village to be welcome, and she always have food every single night ready for a visitor to come.
And so in the book you talked about your close relationship with your father. Even though he was not present because he was fighting in the war, whenever he would come back to the village, I mean, there was a sense of celebration taking place. What is your fondest memory about your late father?
Yes, thank you. So when my father will come, I think because he was in the military, he will always come with a lot of beard, like bushy beard, dark black beard, curls. And I just always remember like jumping on him and hugging him and then like stroking my head around his beard and just smelling like like the soldier body. Like he was just like, I will just look forward to seeing him. And I would say that during the war, I feel like a lot of South Sudanese women were so uh, precise, intelligent, and very smart on how to communicate with their children. Growing up, I never had like anything like to reject my dad, but I knew that he was doing a noble work. And I feel like that their contribution that is not highlighted because during the wartime, most of South Sudanese children were raised by mothers, and they did a good job, everything they can to always make sure that the children think positively of their father. So my love for my dad, I would say that I will really credit it to my grandmother and all the women in my village or my immediate tribe that always talk highly of him. So all I knew about him was that he was a caring dad. He loved me, even if he's not around me every day. He is doing he's doing thing for the nation, for South Sudan, but I just remember even saying something like that, why are you not here? And he's like, like something like it didn't make sense to me, but he talked along the line that like, if somebody is threatening my family or you and your friend, I want you to live in freedom. And so I will do whatever I can to make sure you grow up in freedom. So I kind of knew that he was somehow doing a noble work to make sure the next generation will be free. I just didn't understand the extent of that or the sacrifice of that thing.
Yes, it's just, our fathers are so brave, and the sacrifice they made is just unbelievable. It can never be repaid. But what you're doing is putting his memory down in the book, and that is important in preserving his memory and also ensuring that, your children and grandchildren also know his memory. It's so important. And the people of South Sudan as well, because his contribution, we're very grateful for it, though it's very heartbreaking to what happened. Because of the continuous attack your village was experiencing, you had to flee your village, and then you were accompanied outside of your village by your uncle Majok. You ended up in Kakuma refugee camp. Can you talk about that experience?
Yes. So when we left our village, we really walked for maybe like a couple of weeks until we reached a place called Bo Town. And it was there in Bo Town actually that I was like, okay, the war is real now. And one thing that I always vividly is ingrained in my mind is like, I think most people see that famous picture. There's a picture of a child and there's a vulture behind a child that was starving. It was in Bo Town that I saw children that were starving to that stage. I have never seen anything in my village before. And I think that because of the people running, a lot of people were running maybe for a month before us or what, I don't know, but like those children were really malnourished. And at that point, I was like, okay, it is really dangerous here, wherever the villages that we are going. And it was there, actually, the UN lorries came, and we got into one of them, came to a place called Kidipo, and then from Kidipo to Capoeira to Nairuz. And then when they captured Torit, not Torit, Capoeira, we had to go from Nairuz to Lokichokyo to the US border. And at the border, actually was the first time I heard of the word refugee. Because growing up, I have always been called Rebecca Deng. Well, like that's how I grew up was my name. And I remember getting into lorries to go to Kakuma refugee camp. Now they say that, here is the UN identification card. And I say, but my name, and they say, well, it doesn't matter. Your name is not in there. It's just a number. So suddenly we changed from being a people, a tribal people, a people that are known to being a people. Now our name is just a number. We become a number instead of having an identity that is a name. And I described that in my book, asking my uncle, what is a refugee? Because I'm like, I'm not a refugee, I have a name. And it's like, well, a refugee is somebody that is kicked out of the country and is stateless. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not stateless. You told me that we are only going for a short amount of time. Actually, they lied to me to keep me going. My uncle and my grandmother, they say that I was going to Toch, which is like where traditionally women from our village and that part of Dinka section, when you become a woman, like maybe 14, 15 or 12, I don't know really the age, you start going to Toch, which is like kind of like summer camping where the cattle are. But I think that is a part of going to the next season of your life. You're becoming a woman now or a young boy to learn about cattle raising and being with, mixing with other tribal people there, the Toch. So at that point, I was like, wow, I'm a refugee. So we arrived at Kakuma, and Kakuma refugee camp broke my heart the first time I saw it. It was not organized. There was no running water. There was no electrine or bathroom. There was nothing set up, and we were contributed tents to take, and it was like 100, maybe 110 degrees. So when you get into the tent, because it's made of plastic, it just kind of like everything just stop and it's heat. So you are sitting there and you dripping. And I described that in my book. The only thing that I saw was water from the borehole when we go and pump it. And then the sweat from our bodies hitting the ground. So was that dry? As I described, my village was just like covered with greenery, you know, like aluk, which is like a local grass that grows. It's like golden fuzzy hair on the top. Butterflies, bird, now to nothing. And then we just sat there. We got a scoop of rice or corn. When we go and get our food, we have to line up, you know. So it's not like you getting up like in our village, you get up, you go to your garden, you collect your food, or if you need a vegetable you don't have, you go to your neighbor garden and they give it to you. Now we were being lined up like literally. Kind of like people in a prison or something. So that was too much for my young mind. And I was asking a lot of questions. So are we going back to South Sudan soon? And my uncle say, yes, we will. We will just be here for a month or a couple of months, and then we will go back. And then month turn into year. And before I know it, I was in a refugee camp for 8 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know it's such a long time that you ended up staying there in such dire conditions. You know, it's just a very hard part of life. When you arrived in the United States, you were placed with a white foster family. And then at the same time, you ended up discovering that you were pregnant. That must have been a clear shock to you. Regardless of the pregnancy, your foster family was supportive and ensured that you continued your education. Can you talk about that whole experience?
Yeah, so I arrived November 6, 2000. So the very first plane that was carrying the lost boys and lost girls, I was one of them. And maybe so that was November, December, January, February. March, that's when I found out I was pregnant, or late February. So into my 4 month of pregnancy and had no idea. I had told my first mom that I was missing my period, and then she was like, well, but you are young, you know, at that age, you know, like sometime it come and then it can stay away for a while, and because of weather changing and diets in your system too, it can do that. So anyway, when we find out that I was pregnant, it was very shocking, you know, because I was 15 going to 16. But one thing that was clear in my mind was that I'm going to raise that child. And that had nothing to do with my foster parent, but have everything to do with my Dinka upbringing and seeing young girls being mothers. So I knew that I want to raise my child, and I want my child. I don't want some other alternative that was suggested. I shut them down. I want my child.
Yeah.
So my foster parent then jump in at that time. They're like, okay, like if you want your child, you are young and you just enroll in high school. My foster mom had her first child at that time. And so she's like, you know what, I can stay at home and help raise them, but this is what will happen. Every time during lunch break, you're gonna come home and breastfeed the baby, because the high school was not far away from our house, my foster parent house. And then at 3 o'clock when I come home, I help her with the baby. We feed the baby, bath, and all of that. And then I do my homework and then help again bedtime and then go back to my homework. So that's how I did it. It was really overwhelming. Trying to deal with a new culture, new language, new food, being a new mom. But at the same time, there was the innocence of coming straight from a refugee camp and my African contact that I did not really pay attention, because I was like, if I was in the US for a year or two and that happened to me, I feel like I will have such a self-conscious, like as a high schooler, you're walking, all of your friends, they're just kids, but there you are. You have to go run and feed the baby, and who knows, as I walk around, maybe I had a leak on my book, like things like that. So I just become so thankful that like the friend that choose to sit around me during lunch time, and this is what I encourage the high schoolers, and I hope some days to speak to the high schoolers that things can happen, and children can have babies in high school, but that is not their life. This child is part of the identity, and they should finish the education. They should be encouraged instead of being bullied, instead of being belittled. So that was that experience, and it was overwhelming, but I overcome it because of the environment.
Indeed, and there's really an important backstory to how you got pregnant, and I really encourage our viewers to go ahead and purchase the book, because this is an issue that is happening in our society a lot, that our mothers have experienced or our grandmothers experienced, but we hardly talk about it, and it's quite pervasive within our South Sudanese society. So get a copy of the book to find out more. You eventually, even though, you are a young mother with a child, you eventually went ahead and obtained your university degree and even progressed educationally. Why was it important for you to focus? Because also another thing, you came here with not knowing English at all, which is amazing. And then you're learning English, and then, deciding to go to college, then going beyond as well. So why was education so important to you?
Thank you. I think at that point, the simplest way was that I was doing it for my daughter. As you just said, there's a backstory to it, and there's a lot of women that have children out of their consents, that it was not their choice, and then there's a stigma that comes with that. Or there are some that have children with their consent, but they are young, and there's a stigma too to it. So I want my little girl to know that having you was never a mistake. It was just a wrong timing, but it was never a mistake. And I want her to know that, and that I'm going to do everything it takes to continue pursuing my dream, because my dream coming to United States was actually to go to school. And I felt that if somebody say, I will help you with this, and I will just lose some sleepless night and comfort, I wanted to do that. So high school, I finished high school, and then I went to college, did my 4 years of college, and then I went to graduate school. And again, it was to show my daughter that I am doing the best I can. You were born here in the United States. You have all the opportunity. If I come as an immigrant, a refugee, and ESL student that didn't know English or culture and making it, you should make it. So I was trying to set an example for her to know when she grow up, she's gonna grow. She was growing up in a white community with my white foster family, but she is a South Sudanese. So I knew at some point she's gonna have identity crisis, or like, why is it only me? Because the city we were in, there's not a lot of Black people. Even in high school, I was the first one, and then some joined later. So I always wanted her to be like, you're going to be in a different environment. You're going to be always having something that is not normal, but you can still be you. You can
Yeah.
yeah.
That is so important. Now, as we're coming to the end, you know, in the book here, you really emphasize from the start the importance of culture, the South Sudanese culture, the respective different cultures within our country that we have. You know, why was it important to give readers an insight into the different parts of South Sudanese culture, and you hold it so strongly?
Thank you. I strongly believe that thing that life have thrown at me, if I did not have that ages 0 to 5, that was so grounded in deep cultural practice that respect children and raise children. Remember, I was an orphan at 2, but I never felt like an orphan in my life. You know, I was fed, I was loved just the same way as my cousins that have their mom and dad. And that's a cultural practice. There are some cultures where there's an institution for orphan that they are taken there. And so it is important that, like, I highlight the culture, because everything I have, I credit it to my early culture upbringing. Now, I talk later on a trauma, and sometimes things change, even like the way I become to have a baby. Those are the ways they are sometimes like say, oh, people don't want to take responsibility, and they say it's a culture. It was never a culture. When you go years back, even in the village, they say there was no girl that can ever get married until they turn 18. And if a man take advantage of a woman when they didn't have their consent, there is a way to deal with that in a village. Either their head really get like they get whatever beaten, or their family pay for it. Like there was a culture that respect women, that respect young children, boys and girls alike. This new culture where you're seeing young girls being given up early for post-marriage, for whatever it is, and young boys being recruited, this is what I call the culture of war. And as a human being, if you have been in a conflict area, culture can change really quickly, and we have to be honest about it, and we have to remember who we were before the conflict. And I think that's why I emphasize the culture, to make sure that, because sometimes I feel like there's a lot of talk, like where people are like, oh, this is just a Sudanese culture, when, you know, like I wish it was different. No. Different, like original South Sudanese culture was a culture that respect women and children. And even I do a lot of reading in a South Sudan conflict. There were some women that joined the military, but most of the time women and children were protected. Men give up their life. In any developed country.
Yes, indeed.
You don't see that. You don't see that. So we have to really be careful and credit a culture that was good, and also see where the culture went wrong, and be bold and highlight that.
Indeed. And our culture is our identity. You know, we cannot, you know, run away from it. Now, as we ended the program, you know, what would you like the readers to take away from your book? What they meant for evil, and where can they purchase it?
Thank you. So my message on what they meant for evil, it is a personal life journey of, you know, having a beautiful life, but shattering, and that kind of putting it back together. And this is what I always tell people. If anyone really live a life and say that I have lived well, you are going to be broken one way or another. Your heart will be break, either directly through you or through your relationship. So it is important to know that brokenness happened, but that is not our only story. One of my favorite artry that I like is a Japanese art, where they take a broken object, either a teacup or a bowl, a super bowl. If it is broken, they will take the broken part together and put a liquid of gold or a silver between the crack, And actually they highlight it. So when things are glued back together, you can literally trace your hand where the brokenness happened. And then they say that that object actually become more expensive and beautiful because of its brokenness. Brokenness give us resiliency. Brokenness give us like, oh wow, I didn't know I didn't know that I would make it out, but I have made it out. So with our history of being broken of South Sudan, somebody that will say South Sudan is the same as before the war, you lying to yourself. We have seen what happened when the war happened, families being scattered, family starting the broken up families starting. That is what happened when the war happened and people are scattered everywhere. But yet we can say that we can be man back. We are still beautiful people. We are people of culture. We are people of the Nile. We are the kings and the queens. And if you go back to the early history, Sudanese culture, women were leaders. And this is another thing, like now that we talk in the modern days, there are less women in a leadership than there used to be centuries ago. And why is that? So I think that like just embracing our brokenness, highlighting it instead of minimizing it, and then say, this is what happened, and I'm still walking. My book, you can find it on Amazon, you can find it at Barnes and Noble, you can find it at Walmart. And I think really pretty much anywhere the books are sold. One of the things I want to add with my book, the audio part of it was narrated by C.D. LaLoca. She's the leading voice in Lion King, the musical. So it is amazing, the audio. Thank you.
So both versions are there, both the audio as well as the book version.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Yes, I really enjoyed reading this book immensely, and I learned so much, So our viewers, I would absolutely encourage you to read this remarkable story of our guest today, Rebecca Deng. And Rebecca Deng, thank you so much for joining me here on Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you so much, June.
Yes, thank you.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page at Sunrise Media.